The ground you are walking on right now is a graveyard. And I do not mean the accumulated dust of human ancestors. I mean the foundational bedrock of reality itself was conceptualized by our earliest civilizations as the rotting, butchered remains of a primordial mother goddess. We look up at the night sky and see the sterile vacuum of space governed by cold, physical laws. But before the imposition of those laws, before the boundaries of civilization were even a thought, the ancients looked into the dark and saw a dense, terrifyingly fertile oceanic plenum. This is the story hidden in the ruined library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, etched into the fragmented cuneiform tablets of the Enuma Elish, a Babylonian epic of creation dating back to the late 2nd millennium BCE. It opens in a state of absolute chronological and spatial ambiguity, a time when the heaven above had not been named and the earth beneath did not exist. There was only a suffocating, heavy amniotic fluid. In this pitch-black void existed two co-eternal, commingling entities. There was Apsu, the male progenitor, who represented the deep, sweet, freshwater aquifers. And there was Tiamat, the monstrous matriarch of the bitter, churning, saltwater ocean. Together with Mumu, the pure thermodynamic potential of entropy, they formed the foundational trinity of existence, a silent, stagnant peace before the concept of physical form ever existed. In her original manifestation, Tiamat was not an enemy. She was the original cosmic womb, the one who gave birth to them all. From her dark, saline depths autonomously emerged the first generations of gods, including Lamu, Lahamu, Anshar, and Kishar. But this act of creation was the catalyst for an inevitable cosmic violence. These newly generated divine offspring were chaotic, clamorous, and endlessly disruptive. Their relentless metallic clanging and frantic activity shattered the silent, primordial peace of the oceanic depths. Apsu, driven to madness by the noise and unable to rest, plotted to annihilate his own progeny to restore the void, declaring his intent to destroy their way of life so that silence might reign and they might sleep. Tiamat, manifesting the fierce protective nature of the primordial mother archetype, was enraged by her consort's murderous intent, crying out against the destruction of her own biological creations. She wanted to protect her children. But the cosmological paradigm irrevocably fractured when the younger god Ea preemptively usurped and murdered Apsu through a magical spell. This single act of patricide forced Tiamat into a state of absolute entropic retribution. Driven to vengeance and manipulated by her newly elevated consort Kingu, the grieving mother underwent a terrifying metamorphosis. The slow, roiling currents of black water began to churn with apocalyptic fury. She transitioned from the passive, generative womb of the universe into an active, destructive force of chaotic biology. To wage war against the younger gods who disrupted her silence and murdered her partner, she tore open her own flesh to spawn a horrific brood of 11 venomous hybrid monsters. The Akkadian cuneiform explicitly details the summoning of these nightmares, the archetypal ancestors to all subsequent mythological terrors. From the deep emerged the Mushmahu, a 7-headed serpent hybrid, alongside the Ugalu, a lion-headed storm demon. She birthed the Hydra, the hairy hero, the great demon, the savage dog, the scorpion man, the fish man, and the bull man. These were not just beasts, they were the carriers of merciless weapons, fearless in the face of battle, representing the unrestrained, devouring fury of unbridled nature, mobilized to annihilate the nascent constructs of divine law. The climax of this cosmic warfare detailed in Tablet 4 of the epic, is not merely a martial exchange, but a clash of absolute states of being. It is architecture versus the abyss, form versus formlessness. Marduk, the storm-wielding champion of the younger gods and the patron deity of Babylon, steps forward to confront the monstrous matriarch in a battle for ontological supremacy. The anatomical descriptions of what follows are exceptionally visceral, emphasizing the violent physical subjugation of feminine chaos. Marduk does not simply defeat Tiamat, he systematically dismantles her biology. As the giant serpent opens her massive maw to consume him, Marduk traps her boundless oceanic expanse in a massive net. He drives the Imhulu, an evil and unendurable wind, straight down her throat. Her belly becomes grotesquely distended, the sheer pressure rendering her incapable of closing her jaws. In that moment of agonizing vulnerability, Marduk fires a single, devastating arrow that tears through her stomach, severs her intestines, and violently pierces her heart. The subsequent creation of the known world is not a beautiful act of intelligent design, but an act of brutal architectural butchery. Resting upon her massive, defeated corpse, Marduk takes his merciless club and crushes Tiamat's skull. He severs her arteries, allowing the north wind to carry her blood away as a gruesome sign of absolute victory. Then he physically bisects the saltwater dragon, splitting her bisected corpse into two like a dried fish. This anatomical dissection becomes the literal foundation of the Babylonian physical universe. He heaves one half of her torn flesh upward to form the firmament of the heavens, establishing a biological barrier to hold back the cosmic waters. The other half is flattened and manipulated to create the terrestrial earth. The ancient text ensures the Babylonians understood the horrific topography of their world. Her massive breasts are piled high to form mountain ranges, and her tail is violently twisted to lock the cosmos in place. The twin lifelines of Mesopotamian civilization, the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, are explicitly described as flowing directly from Tiamat's weeping, severed eyes. Every drop of water nourishing the ancient crops was a tear from a murdered god. Following this slaughter, Marduk establishes absolute cosmic and temporal order, organizing the constellations, dictating the calendar, and constructing Babylon as the earthly nexus of divine power. But the divine architects are weary, and so Marduk commands the execution of Kingu, Tiamat's rebel consort. From the tainted, coagulating blood of this executed god mixed with earthly clay, humankind is engineered for a singular, bleak purpose. We were created to bear the grueling agricultural and architectural workload of the gods, allowing them to rest. The Babylonian universe is explicitly defined as a totalitarian labor camp, built directly upon the rotting, butchered remains of a primordial mother goddess. But destroying a monstrous body does not destroy a conceptual terror. The physical carcass of the serpent was repurposed into our sky and soil. But the psychological trauma of this cosmic warfare could not be contained within the walls of Babylon. The monstrous cosmology of Mesopotamia was about to bleed westward, embedding itself into the minds of neighboring empires, and slowly slithering into the sacred scriptures of a people who would change the world forever. The saltwater abyss was dead, but the Leviathan was just waking up. We think of the Bible as a book of absolute peace, of a calm, authoritative voice speaking the universe into existence from a silent void. But if you look closely at the ancient parchment, you will see the ink is bleeding, revealing a palimpsest of total war. The monstrous cosmology of Mesopotamia, the suffocating terror of the saltwater abyss, did not remain confined to the muddy banks of the Euphrates. It bled westward into the Levant, embedding itself deeply within Canaanite and Ugaritic mythos, before being inherited, heavily redacted, and theologically weaponized by the authors of the Hebrew Bible. The linguistic and mythological lineage bridging the ancient polytheistic sea dragon to the biblical Leviathan is not a matter of speculative theology, but a well-documented philological fossil record unearthed by modern academic scholarship. Imagine the ancient city of Ras Shamra around 1400 BCE, where crumbling, wedge-shaped marks on jagged clay tablets detail the violent Baal cycle. Within this cycle, the northwest Semitic storm and fertility god, Baal-Hadad, engages in a violent cosmic battle against Yam, the deified sea, and his monstrous aquatic retainers. The most prominent of these terrors is a multi-headed sea dragon known in the ancient Ugaritic tongue as Lotan. The descriptive poetry utilized in these texts provides an undeniable, verbatim ancestor to later biblical Hebrew scriptures. Lotan is repeatedly characterized using specific, highly formalized epithets, described as the fleeing or fast-moving serpent, the wriggling or twisting serpent, and the mighty tyrant with 7 heads. Centuries later, when the Hebrew scribes composed their own sacred texts, they did not invent a completely new lexicon of chaos from thin air. They appropriated the exact terminology and imagery of their Canaanite neighbors to assert the supreme, unmatched dominance of Yahweh over the very same primordial fears. The Hebrew word for the great sea creature, Leviathan, is derived from the Semitic root meaning to twine, twist, wind, or wreath, directly reflecting the sinuous, serpentine nature of its Ugaritic predecessor. However, despite adopting the aesthetic language of the chaos dragon, the priestly authors of Genesis executed a deliberate and masterful theological downgrade of this cosmic threat. During the 5th day of creation, the text calmly states that God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that creeps. In the surrounding Ugaritic texts, these monsters were terrifying, co-eternal divine rivals, capable of threatening the sovereignty of the gods. By stark contrast, the Genesis narrative casually lists them as mere biological specimens, manufactured by a singular, unopposed God in a harmonious sequence. This is an act of profound, calculated demythologization. The Hebrew text violently strips the chaos goddess of her divinity, her malice, and her autonomy. There is no epic battle, no bisection of a corpse to build the world, and no struggle for supremacy. The great sea monsters are reduced to the status of ordinary fish and fowl, existing solely because Yahweh willed them into the ecosystem, without a single ounce of resistance. Yet, a trauma of that magnitude, the primordial memory of the struggle against chaos, could not be entirely excised from the Hebrew psyche, nor could it be perfectly sanitized by the priestly authors. Scattered throughout the poetic, wisdom, and prophetic books of the Old Testament are hidden scriptural fragments that clearly retain the raw, bleeding echo of this violent, pre-biblical cosmic warfare. Psalm 74 erupts with a violent, mythic memory that completely shatters the serene, unchallenged creation narrative of Genesis. It declares that God split open the sea by his power and broke the heads of the monster in the waters, explicitly praising the crushing of the plural heads of Leviathan and giving it as food to the creatures of the desert. This perfectly mirrors the seven-headed Lotan of the Baal cycle. Here, creation is not a peaceful spoken word, but a bloody primordial battlefield where the chaos dragon must be physically shattered. Similarly, the Book of Job presents Leviathan not as a defeated foe or a mundane biological entity, but as an unconquerable terror of the deep, a creature whose absolute invulnerability serves to highlight the terrifying, incomprehensible power of God. God taunts Job with the impossibility of taming the beast, asking if a mortal man can draw out Leviathan with a hook or play with him as with a bird. In this text, Leviathan is preserved as a creature of absolute dread, a pet to the Almighty, but an apocalyptic nightmare to mortal men, emphasizing that the forces of chaos remain vastly superior to human capability. Finally, the prophet Isaiah projects this ancient combat out of the primordial past and into an eschatological future, promising a final, ultimate victory over chaos at the end of days. He warns that the Lord will take his sharp, great, and mighty sword to slay the dragon of the sea, utilizing the exact phrasing of the fleeing and twisting serpent applied to Lotan centuries prior. The co-eternal, terrifying goddess of the abyss is captured, linguistically rebranded, stripped of her divine independence in Genesis, utilized as a measure of sublime divine terror in Job, and scheduled for final apocalyptic execution in Isaiah. But as the ancient world transitioned from myth to empire, the elites realized something profound. The story of a slaughtered serpent was not just a theological comfort, it was the ultimate architectural blueprint for absolute psychological control. We think of ancient myths as naive bedtime stories for early humans, simple explanations for why it rains or why the sun sets. But that is a profound and dangerous underestimation of ancient political intelligence. The story of the slaughtered serpent, whether it is Marduk butchering the saltwater mother Tiamat, Baal shattering the 7 heads of Lotan, or Yahweh piercing the fleeing Leviathan, was never meant to be mere theological entertainment. Academics define this overarching archetype as Chaoskampf, a German compound word that translates literally to the struggle against chaos. But in practice, this recurring mytheme serves as the fundamental ideological architecture of a completely controlled, deeply governed, and rigidly subjugated human reality. You must understand the suffocating environment these early civilizations were birthed in. Human existence in the ancient Near East was defined by a profound, terrifying, and constant instability. A single unpredictable flooding of the river delta could drown an entire generation. Devastating droughts brought agonizing famine, and the horizon always held the looming threat of brutal foreign invasion. When a populace cannot physically control the erratic, violent forces of nature, or the whims of bloodthirsty neighboring empires, the human mind fractures under the immense pressure. Modern psychology categorizes coping strategies into problem-focused coping, where you actively alter the source of stress, and emotion-focused coping, where you alter your psychological response to an unchangeable stressor. The ancient state apparatus provided the ultimate systemic emotion-focused coping mechanism. They had to provide a flawless illusion. They had to convince the terrifyingly vulnerable masses that the unpredictable monster of chaos was already dead. This massive political illusion was not just preached from a distance. It was physically and theatrically enforced in the very streets of the empire. The political utility of this struggle against chaos is most explicitly visible in the Babylonian Akitu festival. Originating in the 3rd millennium BCE as a simple agricultural celebration of the barley harvest, the festival evolved over centuries into a complex 12-day ideological mechanism designed to re-legitimize the absolute power of the state and the reigning monarch. Held in the spring month of Nisanu, this was not merely a commemoration of the new year. It was a literal, physical, and highly visceral reenactment of Marduk's bloody victory over the chaos dragon Tiamat, bringing the primordial myth out of the ancient past and thrusting it directly into the immediate, urban present. On the 4th day of the festival, the oppressive heat of the Mesopotamian spring was thick with the scent of burning offerings and the weight of absolute authority. Inside the monumental, shadow-drenched Isagila temple, thousands of voices chanted the Enuma Elish in its entirety before the massive cult statue of Marduk. This recitation was a sonic enforcement of the cosmological hierarchy, a terrifying public reminder that cosmic order is not a natural resting state. It is a violently achieved condition that requires constant, vigilant, and brutal maintenance by the divine and his earthly representatives. But the most psychologically profound and terrifying element of this festival was reserved for the 5th day, hidden deep within the suffocating, incense-choked inner sanctum of the temple. Imagine the psychological weight of being the king of Babylon. You are the absolute monarch, a man whose casual whisper dictates the life and death of hundreds of thousands, often a conqueror of vast, sprawling empires. Yet on this day, you are systematically stripped of every defense and led into the inner sanctum by the high priest, known as the Sheshgalu. The air in the room is heavy and still. The priest approaches you not with reverence, but with cold, calculated authority to strip you of your divine mandate. He confiscates your heavy scepter, the loop, the mace, and finally, the massive, gold-laden crown of kingship is lifted from your brow and placed before the statue of the god. You are rendered entirely powerless, reduced to mere fragile mortal flesh. Then the high priest grabs you violently by the ears and forces you, the conqueror of nations, to drop to your knees on the cold, unforgiving temple floor. In this position of ultimate abasement, looking up at the towering, impassive statue, you are compelled to recite a negative confession, your voice trembling as you swear you have not sinned against the god, neglected the city of Babylon, or abused its privileged citizens. And then comes the moment of ultimate physical subjugation. Following a brief reassurance from the priest, your royal insignia are returned, but the ritual culminates in a second, brutal physical strike. The high priest raises his hand and brings it down hard across your cheek. This strike is not symbolic. It is specifically designed to be forceful enough to induce physical weeping. The entire fate of the Babylonian Empire hangs in the agonizing suspense of the next few seconds. The priests watch your bruised face with terrifying intensity, waiting for a single, heavy tear of saltwater to form and fall from your eye. The Babylonians believed with absolute certainty that if the king shed tears, it was an auspicious omen, proving that Marduk was appeased, and the churning, chaotic waters of the abyss would be kept at bay for another year. But if his eyes remained dry, if he showed defiant strength, it signaled that the god was hostile, and the state would inevitably fall to its enemies or succumb to the chaotic waters. By ritually declaring that the serpent is dead and proving that even the most powerful man on earth is utterly subjugated by a higher, violent cosmic law, the state manufactures a flawless illusion of a stable, deeply governed, and safe physical world. The public humiliation of the absolute ruler provides the traumatized populace with a sense of universal justice and predictability. But more importantly, it legitimizes a brutal, unyielding social architecture. The logic is flawless and terrifying. If the universe itself was built upon the violent subjugation of chaos by an absolute totalitarian authority, then human society must exactly mirror that structure to survive. From the elite Awilu nobles down to the mud-covered laboring Wardu slaves, everyone must remain frozen in their designated place to prevent the return of the abyss. The slaughter of Tiamat and Leviathan is the ultimate propaganda tool, an archetypal prerequisite for empire building, military conquest, and the rigid enforcement of the societal status quo. To question the king, or to question the social order, is to risk waking the dragon. But beneath the heavy stone floor of the temple, a new theological rebellion was quietly brewing, suggesting that the monster they were so desperate to keep dead might actually be the only thing that could save them. What if the God you have been praying to your entire life is actually the monster? What if the universe you live in is not a beautiful divine sanctuary, but a rotting biological cage designed to feed on your soul? For centuries, the orthodox architects of civilization hammered a very specific narrative into the human psyche, dictating that the primordial dragon of chaos was dead, that the creator god of the material world was inherently good, and that the rigid laws of physical reality were a blessing. But deep within the splintered, esoteric sects of early Christianity and mystical Judaism in the early centuries of the Common Era, a radical and terrifying theological inversion occurred. Groups like the Ophites, whose very name derives from the Greek word for snake, and the Nassenes, looked at the established order of the physical universe, observed its endless cycles of disease, inherent suffering, and biological decay, and came to a chilling conclusion. The Creator God was not a savior. He was an arrogant tyrant, and the material world was not a sanctuary. It was an inescapable prison. In this overarching Gnostic cosmology, the true, supreme God is an unknowable, utterly transcendent entity residing in an immaterial realm of pure divine fullness, known as the pleroma. The physical universe of dirt, blood, and gravity was not created by this supreme being. Instead, it was constructed by a flawed, ignorant, and deeply insecure lower deity known as the demiurge, frequently named Yaldabaoth. Imagine the sheer cosmic horror of this entity, depicted in secretive Gnostic iconography, not as an old man in the clouds, but as a grotesque abomination with the roaring, ravenous head of a lion and the thick, slithering, muscular body of a massive serpent. This blind, idiot god falsely declared himself the only deity in existence, violently trapping pure, divine sparks of spiritual light within the heavy, suffocating, rotting matter of human bodies. Within this radical, mind-bending paradigm, the entire Orthodox narrative of the Garden of Eden is violently flipped on its head. The serpent coiled around the tree of knowledge is no longer viewed as the author of evil or the satanic adversary trying to damn humanity. Rather, the serpent is revered as the ultimate liberator, a vessel of forbidden gnosis or divine knowledge, sent directly by the higher, benevolent spiritual eon known as Sophia, representing true cosmic wisdom. By encouraging Adam and Eve to eat the forbidden fruit, the serpent was not tricking them. It was desperately attempting to awaken humanity to their true, divine, extraterrestrial origins. It was orchestrating a spiritual rebellion against the oppressive, ignorant demiurge who sought to keep mankind blind, naked, and enslaved in a pathetic state of ignorant subservience. The ancient chaos monster, the great serpent that the Babylonian and Hebrew empires worked so hard to demonize and mentally slaughter, is transfigured from the eternal enemy of order into the only entity willing to save the human soul from a totalitarian creator. To truly understand the claustrophobic terror of this worldview, you have to look at the esoteric depths of Ophite cosmology, visually codified in secretive ritual maps known as the Ophite diagrams. Early church fathers like Origen and Celsus documented these diagrams primarily to debunk them as dangerous heresy, but what they preserved is a blueprint of a cosmic nightmare. These diagrams mapped the spiritual and physical cosmos through a complex, suffocating series of intersecting and concentric circles. They meticulously plotted the corporeal world, the distant realm of light, and the terrifying barriers in between, which were guarded by 7 demonic archons. This was a celestial bureaucracy designed to prevent your soul from ever escaping. There was Michael in the form of a lion guarding the planetary spheres, Sariel, the bull enforcing mechanical laws, Raphael, the dragon, Thothabaoth, the bear imposing physical suffering, and Erataoth, the dog, serving as a relentless cosmic tracker, hunting down escaping divine sparks. But the true, paralyzing horror is revealed when you look at the very edge of the map. All of these archons, all of the planetary spheres, and the absolute entirety of physical creation are enclosed within a massive, impenetrable, boundary-defining outermost circle. And this terrifying outer wall, the world soul that circumscribes the entire apparatus of physical creation, is explicitly named Leviathan. In this ancient esoteric framework, Leviathan is intrinsically linked to the Ouroboros, the maddening symbol of the great serpent swallowing its own tail. It represents a cyclical, terrifyingly infinite reality, a closed, inescapable system of eternal recurrence, biological suffering, and material entrapment. The lesser creator god uses this beast to permanently seal humanity inside the cosmos. Leviathan is not just a monster hiding in the deep ocean. He is the thick, black line of Tartarus and Gehenna, the absolute boundary of outer darkness, permanently separating our corrupted physical universe from the true, warm, divine light of the pleroma. This cultivates a profound, suffocating element of cosmic horror that perfectly prefigures modern existential dread by thousands of years. The devastating revelation is that the chaos beast was never actually killed by Marduk or Baal or Yahweh. The beast is the foundational fabric of our very existence. The physical universe is inherently malignant, a terrifying biological cesspool orchestrated by an insane demiurge. You are not walking on the earth. You are living inside the belly of the serpent, forever trapped within the endless, constricting, muscular coils of Leviathan. The stable, predictable physical reality that humanity desperately clings to for safety is, in fact, an infernal, cosmic digestion machine designed to endlessly consume and recycle your spiritual energy. To achieve salvation in this worldview is not to drop to your knees and worship the creator of this world. It is to acquire the alien, forbidden gnosis necessary to pierce the impenetrable, scaly hide of the Leviathan, and escape into the unknown, silent void beyond the stars, before the jaws close around you for eternity. But as we will soon discover, even the modern world, with all its concrete and digital illusions, cannot keep the serpent asleep forever. You might think that the slaughter of Tiamat and the binding of Leviathan are merely dusty, philological relics, forgotten stories trapped on fractured cuneiform tablets decaying in museum archives. You might look at the hard, brutalist concrete of your modern cityscapes, the glowing, sterile server farms that run our financial markets, and the rigid digital precision of our algorithms, and arrogantly believe we have permanently conquered the darkness of the ancient world. We sleep in climate-controlled rooms. We illuminate the night with artificial street lamps. And we believe, exactly like the orthodox authors of Genesis, that the monsters have been permanently tamed. We act like the high priests of Babylon, convincing ourselves that our complex, modern rituals of statecraft, economics, and technological progress will permanently keep the abyss at bay. But these ancient stories are not dead myths. They are living, breathing, terrifying psychological archetypes that continuously and violently resurface in the human psyche. To understand why the imagery of the sea dragon persists with such relentless tenacity across millennia, we must look through the lens of analytical psychology, specifically the work of Carl Jung. Jung postulated that ancient myths are essentially the projected dreams of entire cultures, manifestations of the collective unconscious, attempting to process fundamental, inescapable human conditions and terrors. In this psychological framework, Tiamat and Leviathan are not literal reptiles swimming in the ocean. They represent the ultimate, primordial manifestation of the shadow and the negative, devouring aspect of the dark, untamed mother archetype. They are the undifferentiated, chaotic, raw potential of the subconscious mind. They are the terrifying oceanic depths of emotion, instinct, and raw, feral nature that rational, conscious thought must constantly battle and suppress just to maintain a functioning ego and build a civilized society. But foundational psychology dictates a chilling reality about human nature. Whatever is repressed does not simply disappear. It is violently pushed down into the dark shadow of the subconscious, where it merely accumulates energy, mutating and waiting in the absolute dark to erupt with terrifying, compensatory violence. When we observe the global zeitgeist of the modern era, the compounding anxieties of the 2000s and 20s, and look forward into the projected instability of the coming years, we see a world uniquely and dangerously primed for the return of the chaos monster. As Jung presciently warned regarding the psychological impact of rapid industrialization and mass society, modern humans have been profoundly uprooted from the earth. We have been herded into massive, sterile urban centers, cut off from the natural rhythms of the planet, and rendered entirely dependent on fluctuating global markets, fragile supply chains, and invisible economic forces that are utterly beyond our individual control. This acute, suffocating loss of personal agency, compounded by looming ecological catastrophes, global pandemics, and the rapid, terrifying collapse of institutional trust, creates an environment of pervasive, systemic anxiety. We are trapped in an invisible cage of our own making, and in eras of profound global instability, the illusion of the architect's control shatters completely. The conscious mind's desperate coping mechanisms fail under the immense pressure. triggering the collective unconscious to revive its most ancient archetypal fears. The modern, paralyzing existential dread you feel when you read about climate collapse, rising sea levels, and unpredictable, invisible viral pathogens mutating beyond medical control, is the exact psychological equivalent of the ancient Babylonian terror of the saltwater abyss rising to drown their mud-brick city. We are once again standing on the shores of the unknown, staring into the black water, feeling the deep tectonic rumblings of Tiamat stirring beneath the concrete sidewalks. Philosophically, the ancient, brutal slaughter of the primordial mother perfectly mirrors the modern industrial paradigm. Our entire way of life is based on the violent suppression, bisection, and exploitation of nature, the feminine, and the chaotic, all in the relentless mechanical pursuit of artificial order and economic progress. Just as Marduk tore Tiamat apart to build his Babylonian utopia, modern civilization systematically strips, mines, and poisons the natural world to sustain its towering, incredibly fragile architectures of capital and industry. But as the archetype of the sea dragon teaches us, suppressing the chaotic ocean only breeds a stagnant, poisonous swamp within the collective human psyche. The generative and untamed forces of nature cannot be permanently destroyed or cleanly excised from the equation of reality. They can only be momentarily dammed up. And the immense crushing pressure building behind that psychological and ecological dam is currently reaching critical mass. The ultimate philosophical conclusion to be drawn from the long, bloody lineage of Leviathan is profoundly chilling. The current order of our society is not a permanent victory over the wild forces of the universe. It is a fragile, paper-thin, temporary mask draped directly over Tiamat's still-beating heart. The firmament of our reality is quite literally constructed from the bisected, rotting corpse of the Chaos Dragon. Every single time the warming oceans rise to swallow a coastline, every time a new virus shuts down global infrastructure, every time the digital financial markets inexplicably collapse into blind panic, it is a visceral, terrifying reminder that the world is not a sterile, mathematically perfect machine. It is a haunted, organic graveyard. The Leviathan is not dead. It is the very boundary of our universe, an infinite serpent patiently circling our fragile, fleeting moment of order. It is waiting in the dark for the inevitable hour when the architect finally fails. The concrete walls crack, and the primordial saltwater comes rushing back in to reclaim what was stolen. We have spent thousands of years worshipping the architects, the layers of concrete, and the writers of laws, believing with all our hearts that they were keeping the monsters out. But the horrifying irony is that the architecture itself is made of the monster. The safety we worship is carved directly from the very chaos we fear. We are not hiding from Leviathan. We are living inside its stomach, desperately pretending the walls of flesh are made of stone. Think about the relentless pressure of your own life, the exhausting need to optimize your routine, to curate a perfect digital existence, to aggressively suppress every messy, chaotic, natural impulse you have, just to fit into the mechanical grid of modern society. You are playing the role of Marduk in your own mind, violently butchering your own natural state to build a sterile, anxious little empire. But the water is rising behind the dam of your forced perfection. So, when the concrete of your reality finally cracks, and the dark, briny water begins to seep through the floorboards of your perfectly structured life? Do you spend your last breath frantically trying to patch the wall, or do you finally let the abyss wash it all away? The dragons of the ancient world were just the first manifestation of this terrifying cycle. But there is a new architecture being built right now, an invisible grid of silicon and algorithms designed to be the ultimate, inescapable cage for the human soul. If you want to understand the new gods currently being born in the dark, and more importantly, how to survive their ascension, make sure you are here for the next chapter.